This is Beyond the Moon, a Ditch Witch podcast where we dig deep into news, job site stories, Ditch Witch culture, and all the other dirt that makes up the industry.
Hey everybody, welcome to our very first episode of Beyond the Moon, a Ditch Witch podcast. I'm your host, Sean Hubbard, and I am joined by a man who really needs no introduction, but I'll give him a brief one. But this is Don Pemberton. Hey Don, how we doing?
Good, how you doing?
Pretty good. So yeah, Don's been at Ditch Witch forever, I think roughly is that what you would call it? How long have you been at the company?
46 in a couple of months.
So Don's kind of a celebrity around the company, and we'll get into why here in just a little bit. As far as your responsibilities at Ditch Witch, you're technically, a fleet manager?
Fleet manager over all the equipment and the vehicles.
How many pieces of equipment? Are we talking company vehicles? Are you talking forklifts?
Company vehicles is around 100, and then the rest of the material handling is about 300 and so. We have several guys that do that.
Yeah.
Maintain them.
Keeps you busy for sure. So, Don, your position is unique in the sense that I think most people know you for the last line of your job description is the
I believe so, the
other duties as assigned.
Yes.
That type of thing. So let's talk about that. If anybody doesn't know what the Super Witch is, I describe it as a monster truck with a chainsaw on the back of it.
A lot of people call it that. A lot of people call it tough trencher, things like that.
Yeah. I'm saying, what would you call it? You've been...
Well, we call it Super Witch.
Yeah, how would you describe it?
Because it's kind of a Superman shows back then that come out, and we were trying to figure a name out for it when we first came up with that. And so being a Ditch Witch, we just put the super in there. And
makes sense. It's Super
just
Witch.
Kept calling it Super Witch. So
yeah. So do you know when was the first Super Witch? Do you know what year that came out?
Yeah, we had it at the first IQ. We called it back then. Was IQ?
Okay.
In 1979, so we probably started building that in 78, which that's the year I started at Ditch Witch.
So yeah, how did that come about? Let's talk about the introduction of the Super Witch. So Don Pemberton's been here for less than a year, and how did you get involved with it, and where did the idea even come from?
The idea came from some sales guys. They were trying to get a gimmick at that IQ because that's our largest show that we was doing at the time.
Right.
And we needed a gimmick. Some people had peanuts, some people had keg beers, some people had whatever to get you at the booth. So someone decided to put a hot rod engine in it.
Yeah.
So, the original machine, we just put a regular engine in it and went to town with it, but it didn't last very good.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to ask. So the original, do you remember the specs of it? Like, was it super? What was it? What was different about it?
The main thing was it was all stock 6510 trencher, but we went to a salvage yard, got a 396 out of a 67 Chevelle,
yeah, and
just cleaned the grease off of it, kind of painted it up a little bit, and put it in there, and went to town with it.
Yeah.
But
so where did that? So I'm thinking back of 1978, 1979. Our founder, Ed Malzahn, was very much involved in the business. And for folks that don't know him, and I actually never got an opportunity to meet him, but everything I've heard about him is that he was the least least flashy.
Yeah, he didn't like
around.
flashy. He just wanted to sell equipment. He loved the Ditch Witch equipment. So he wasn't real happy with us doing that. We had to hide it a lot. And no budget for it, so we had to swipe Ditch Witch parts and put on it.
I gotcha. So nights and weekends type of project?
Pretty much.
So is there, when Ed first discovered that this was a thing and it was going to be essentially a marketing tool for the company, do you remember any conversations that you had with Ed or maybe just facial expressions that he gave you? Like what was the vibe from Ed when he first kind of came around it?
For him, I think it was a love-hate deal. He saw the crowd, how we attracted the crowds, but he really wasn't really into that until about, in the 2000s when we got into a few more motorsports. But as long as we kept out of his way with it, we kind of he let it go. But it's a love-hate deal. He didn't really like it.
Yeah, it wasn't really his cup of tea.
Yeah, he wasn't in the
He didn't want to
rods.
drive it?
No.
Oh, no.
No.
Quite the opposite, I'm sure.
Quite the opposite.
So you start in 1978. Did you start as a fleet guy, or what was your role?
I started on the shipping docks.
Okay.
And then they had some carburetor problems with that engine. Is how I started getting the job of working on them.
Is that something that you were comfortable with? I mean, how does one go from a shipping dock guy to a mechanic
I hot rodded a lot before I
gotcha.
started at Ditch Witch, and so when they had that problem, I was telling some guys I could fix it, so they let me try to fix it, and it just escalated out of that.
Yeah. So it needs a lot of fixing.
It needed a lot of fixing.
Yeah, and it still does.
Yeah, it's a constant stay on top of it machine. It's like any drastic machine like that. You're going to have to stay on top of it.
So when did you, so the first one came out in 1979, so it's been around for a little while, but when did you become the driver of it?
The mid-'80s.
Mid-'80s?
We had trouble with, of course, back then anyone could drive it. We just send it out and a sales guy drive it, and they couldn't keep it running. So I was mechanicking a lot on it then, and they said, let's put one driver on it, and I got the job. So
does that fall into other duties as assigned, or does it slash?
I hated it, but someone had to do it. You know,
Oh, you really didn't like it?
Oh, I hated it.
Why? It's terrible.
No, it
Get
was
to travel and be the star of the show,
and mainly get to play with it and hot rod. And then my wife didn't care because it's not my money.
right? So it's like, go spend somebody else's money on something that you love doing.
Yeah,
It's a good deal. So how much of your time is put into the Super Witch? So as the driver for the last, 35-ish years? I mean, everybody sees it at a show, right? You can go on YouTube right now and search Super Witch, and you're going to see everybody's awesome memories of seeing the thing, and they see you run in, 3 to 5 minute shows, and they think, that's it, right? So Don Pemberton spends 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, that 3 to 5 minutes is a lot of preparation to get to that.
Yeah.
It's gotten better over the years because we've made that thing pretty reliable.
Right.
But even just running that 3 to 5 minutes is going to take 2 or 3 hours just to wash it back up.
Right.
Let alone anything that might break.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's the easy part, right?
Yeah.
Washing it. So, I mean, let's kind of talk about the job that is essentially a full-time job is the Super Witch driver. What all is entailed in that? I mean, you build it, you maintain it, you haul it. Like, what all encompassing are we talking about when we talk about the Super Witch?
You design and build it. That takes several years.
Right.
Because you're sneaking it in, company time and
not sneaking.
Going behind the doors.
After hours.
After hours.
Yeah.
So you build it, and then when you take it places, you have to haul it somewhere, and it takes a lot of preparation to get the truck ready, get it ready, and then get the machine on it.
You got to have a CDL.
CDL driver.
Yep.
It's heavy equipment, so you have to apply by all the rules on the highway. You get it places, and then you hope it runs that place, and if it does, you did good. And put it back on the truck and go home.
Yeah. I think you say that jokingly, kind of. You hope it runs that place, but have there been situations or events that you've gone to where it wouldn't start, or this isn't going to run, or anything like that?
At the beginning, in the first few years, we did.
Yeah.
We'd carry spare parts. Like I say, as we've went along, we've made it reliable. But the first started out, you don't know much about that deal, so you'd break something, but using Ditch Witch parts, most of your dealerships has those parts.
Right.
And the mechanics are always happy to help you work on a hot rod.
Oh, I'm sure.
And we'd get her back together and run it some more. So
what version are we on right now? This is Super Witch 7. 7. Okay, so let's Super Witch 1 came out in 1979. How many? Obviously, we've had 6, 7 iterations since then. But what typically leads to an iteration? And is there a Super Witch that was your favorite?
The last one was a favorite.
Yeah.
We always tried to follow our machines.
Okay.
And so when we started out the 6510, when we changed something, which was in 82, we changed to the new look of the hood and a different color, but we stayed black with the machine. We changed it to look like the 8020.
Right.
And that'd be Super Witch 2.
Okay. When was that?
In 82.
In 82?
Mm-hmm. And then in 86, we made that, you guys probably haven't seen it, but it's a CMX 2000 remote control. Had a Perkins engine in it. It was all quiet.
Yeah.
That didn't go over because everybody said, where's the Super Witch?
Right. Like, wait a minute. That's not the same.
Yeah, it wasn't loud. So then in 91, we built the Super Witch 3. And it is alcohol and fuel injected and had a blower on it and about 800 horsepower of a little old 355 Chevrolet.
Yeah.
So that one would plow about 2 foot deep in 17 seconds. So
Get after it.
2 foot, and it'd be a 300 foot,
Yeah.
17 seconds. So it was a little
That'll do.
radical. And then Ed,
We should sell those. Why?
Ed really didn't like that one. It
No.
was too much hot rod.
I
So.
bet. Yeah, so I think I remember you telling a story, and this is back to Ed a little bit, and just kind of knowing the type of person he was. So Don will run the Super Witch at, we call them customer fly-ins or equipment seminars now. We'll bring dealers and customers in, and they can take a tour of the factory, and they'll look at all of our equipment and get to test it all out. And then it always kind of concludes with Don doing a Super Witch show. But I feel like there was a story in there, maybe it blew up or something at that show, or it blew up one time in front of Ed.
Well, I mean, we've had several episodes in front of Ed, but you know, one of the things that I'd like to say is he had a K that he was proud of. That was his first machine that started making Ditch Witch,
Okay.
a K4, and he'd ride that at the beginning and do a little parade out through there. And I always brought up the tail. I was always the last one that ran, and that kind of told everyone to get back on the bus.
Right. It's a sign that
But
it's over.
But he'd always tell me, he said, "I'm first, you're last." So
That's right. You get at the end of the line.
yeah, you get the last.
Yep. So that thing, if anybody hasn't seen it, it is incredibly loud, and it draws a crowd. So can you talk about that? So we take it to IQ, Now Utility Expo. We run it 3 times a day for, I think the show is 3 days long. So 8 or 9 sessions or shows that Don puts on. Can you talk about the reaction of people that are at that show when you fire it up, or the first time that it dawned on you that, oh my gosh, we're onto something here?
You know, I think the first time we was running it, and you don't realize how much of the crowd, the second time you run it, how much they just start getting around our fence and watching what we were doing.
Yeah.
But the best time I saw was they had an aerial photo from one of those boom trucks that's 40 foot in the air.
Right.
And it just showed how much it looks like a magnet. It just grabs the people and just brings them to our booth when you fire that thing up.
It's like the greatest marketing tool of all time.
In the last several years, we just started doing it on times, so you'll see them congregating around about 20, 30 minutes before that show, so they don't miss it.
Yeah. So what is the reaction? I mean, so you're driving the thing, right? Everybody's watching you. I mean, there's got to be a sense of pride, I suppose, that everybody's looking at you and looking at this machine.
Well, you know, in the beginning it's scary because, you know, I'm not an actor or anything, and then what's all these people doing watching me? And then,
right.
Then if I mess up, what is it? You know, if I wreck it, we've had lots of incidents that, you know, I aim toward equipment, so if you hit something, we can just fix that piece of equipment.
Right.
But I've had close calls and get off and act like I did it.
I did that on purpose.
Some of it.
Yeah, I think it was at that show where I had met you. So we built up a big mound of dirt that the Super Witch is on, and there's a big banner that goes over top of it, right? To come see the Super Witch, and it's got the show times and all that stuff. But I think it was at that show that you were parking it, so you drive back up onto the hill and then just park it. But I feel like you went too far backwards in the thing.
Oh, I like to get a little more antics in it than I should.
Yeah.
And I was backing up at that show, I think, and they didn't make the hill as long as usual, and I stopped, and it'll go up in the air, and it just sat there.
It
wouldn't
stayed
come
there
down.
forever.
So it came back down, and I said, whew, I planned it.
Yep.
But it wasn't planned.
No, it wasn't planned, but everybody loved it. Like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
he held that wheelie for a long time.
For a long time.
Yeah. So you mentioned some close calls, and you were nervous about it as you first started. So let's talk about the practice time that you put into this thing. So you started in '79, or started becoming the driver in the early '80s. How often were you practicing on the Super Witch before you took it?
Oh,
in front
most
of
of
a crowd?
it then was shows. I mean, we couldn't afford to break it very often.
Yeah.
So
Figure it out while you're there.
figure out as you go.
Yeah.
So, and it was new to the crowd, so they wasn't expecting any more than I gave them.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Now they're expecting a pretty good show.
Yeah.
Wheelie about 200 foot or so. It's a minimum, and get up about 40 mile an hour in that wheelie. But
Yeah.
back then, we were lucky to get a wheelie out of it.
I gotcha. And when you got one, I bet everybody loved it.
Oh yeah,
Because they'd never seen it before.
They'd never seen it. They didn't have a clue that's what that machine was going to do.
Right. So are there anything come to mind as far as like the biggest crowd that you've ever performed in front of, or are they all kind of?
Largest crowd I was ever at was Tulare, California. It's the largest tractor show.
Okay.
And we were there at that facility, just at the local Ditch Witch booth. And when you saw that crowd, that's when you realize there's a lot of people. There's over 3,000 people a day.
Oh, wow.
So
Got a lot of eyeballs looking at you.
a lot of eyeballs.
Did you mess anything up at that show, or was it perfect?
No, I did good.
So you mentioned too that there's everybody that sees it at these shows knows that it does wheelies and it's loud and it's impressive and it draws a crowd. But the first time I saw it dig out there in Perry, Oklahoma, that was wild. Can you talk about the most recent iteration that we have right now, Super Witch 7? What are the digging capabilities, and does anybody appreciate that, or is that just kind of an afterthought?
If you've sat on a trencher most of your life, you'll appreciate this one. Most of them dig about 20 foot a minute. This one digs 100 foot a minute.
I gotcha.
So you get done a little quicker.
Yeah.
Might use a little more gas, but you get done a little quicker.
No, it's impressive. And there are some videos out there of it's trenching. And I remember the first time I saw it, that was just one of the things that stuck out at me. It was like,
yeah, if you've been on a trencher, you appreciate that. It'll move the dirt and it'll get after it.
Yeah, no doubt. Hey, I definitely want to continue this conversation, and we're going to. But for you folks, join us next week. We're going to have Don back on, and we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to get into a bunch more stuff, Super Witch. We've got some VR stuff to talk about. Don was highlighted in several big media platforms, and we want to talk about all those things. So hop on us with us next week, and we'll continue this conversation with Don Pemberton.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of Beyond the Moon. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform and follow us on social media @Ditch Witch.